Imagine looking out your front window and watching thousands of heavily armed enemy warships violently slam onto your local beach. If you love a good underdog story, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to see how this one plays out. This stone relief shows King Darius. His empire absorbed every rival power, creating an undefeated military force. Darius targeted Athens to punish their rebellion, intending to burn the city to ensure no other Greek state challenged his authority. Athens was completely outmatched. They sent a desperate runner to ask the fierce warriors of Sparta for help, but the Spartans were busy with a religious festival and couldn't march. The Athenians were on their own. With a massive enemy physically standing on their shores and no backup coming, they had a terrifying choice: hide behind their walls and wait for a siege, or march out to meet an empire head-on. They chose to march. The Athenian defenders were citizen soldiers, farmers, bakers, and craftsmen who had traded their tools for spears and shields to protect their families. To survive, the Greeks relied on a highly specific fighting style. This ancient pottery shows their core formation, the phalanx. Instead of fighting one-on-one, the men stood shoulder to shoulder. They overlapped their heavy wooden shields and pointed their spears forward, creating a dense, moving wall. They also wore thick bronze armor, like this Corinthian helmet. All that metal made them slow, but highly resistant to physical attacks. The phalanx only worked if everyone held their ground. If one baker or farmer panicked and broke the line, the enemy would pour through the gap, and their entire city would be destroyed. Absolute discipline was their only real defense. There was a deadly problem: Persian archers. If the Greeks just stood in formation, thousands of falling arrows would eventually chip away their heavy armor. One of the key Athenian commanders, Miltiades, understood Persian tactics. He knew that playing it safe would guarantee a slow defeat. They had to take a massive risk. Miltiades ordered something counterintuitive. He intentionally weakened his battle line center, leaving a few rows of men opposite the strongest part of the Persian army. He stacked the pulled soldiers on the outer edges, creating incredibly heavy, dense blocks of men on the flanks. By leaving his center fragile, Miltiades practically invited the Persian army to charge in. The Greeks charged at full sprint, covering open ground to reach the enemy lines before Persian archers could find their range. The two armies collided. The thick bronze spearheads of the Greeks slammed into the lighter armor of the Persian infantry. The Persian center pushed the thin Athenian middle backward. Thinking victory was near, the Persians rushed into the gap, but the reinforced Greek edges held. Those thick outer blocks pivoted inward. The trap snapped shut. The Persian center was completely surrounded, crushed from three sides by walls of bronze. The Persians had superior numbers, but their confidence was used against them. Their eager push for a quick win pulled them into a meat grinder. Panic spread. The surviving Persian soldiers broke formation and desperately raced back toward the shoreline, trying to reach their ships. The Persian fleet immediately set course for the city of Athens, sailing around the coastline to strike the urban center while it remained completely unguarded. The Athenian soldiers watched them go. These men had just survived a terrifying melee. They were bleeding, exhausted, and still carrying 50 pounds of armor. This ancient vase depicts runners in a dead sprint, capturing the energy of what happened next. The entire Athenian army turned around and force-marched 26 miles back to the city, pushing their physical limits. Every step was fueled by terror. If the Persian fleet arrived first, the men knew their wives, children, and homes would be wiped out. A few hours later, the massive Persian fleet finally rounded the rocky coast, completely ready to burn the city of Athens to the ground. But as they looked up at the high city walls, they saw something impossible. The exact same blood-soaked soldiers they had just fought on the beach were already standing there, waiting for them. The Persian commanders realized they were outsmarted on the battlefield and outworked on the road. Without surprise on their side, they ordered the ships home. Back on the beach, the Greeks buried their fallen soldiers under this massive mound of earth. It remains there today, a physical scar of the day they defied an empire. The Battle of Marathon proves that a massive advantage in size doesn't guarantee a win. With iron discipline, courage, and a brilliant trap, a small city forced an empire to retreat. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Panic spread. the surviving Persian soldiers broke formation and desperately raced back toward the shoreline, trying to reach their ships. The Persian fleet immediately set course for the city of Athens, sailing around the coastline to strike the urban center while it remained completely unguarded. The Athenian soldiers watched them go. These men had just survived a brutal, terrifying melee. They were bleeding, exhausted, and still carrying 50 pounds of armor. This ancient vase depicts runners in a dead sprint, capturing the energy of what happened next. The entire Athenian army turned around and force-marched 26 miles back to the city, pushing their physical limits. Every step was fueled by terror. If the Persian fleet arrived first, the men knew their wives, children, and homes would be wiped out. They had to win a second race. A few hours later, the huge Persian fleet finally rounded the coast, completely ready to burn the city of Athens to the ground. But as they looked up at the high city walls, they saw something impossible. The exact same blood-soaked soldiers they had just fought on the beach were already standing there, waiting for them. The Persian commanders realized they were outsmarted on the battlefield and outworked on the road. Without the element of surprise, they ordered the ships to turn around. They went home. Back on the beach, the Greeks buried their fallen soldiers under this massive mound of earth. It remains there today, a physical scar of the day they defied an empire. The Battle of Marathon proves that a massive advantage in size doesn't guarantee a win. With iron discipline, courage, and a brilliant trap, a small city forced an empire to retreat. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. The plain of Marathon was finally quiet. The Athenian army had chased the Persian infantry to the shoreline and won a staggering victory. Now the hoplites were exhausted, many were wounded, and many had just watched their friends die. They stood among the dead and watched the surviving Persian expedition retreat to their ships. But as the Greek commanders looked out at the water, any sense of relief vanished. The Persian sails were moving, but they were not turning east toward Asia. The fleet remained fully operational, and the commanders were making one final move. This map shows the geography of the Attic Peninsula. The Persian ships were turning south, following the coastline. Their destination was Athens. The city had sent its fighting force to Marathon, leaving the population defenseless. The calculation was simple and favored the Persians. The sea does not care about exhaustion. A ship does not need to march or climb mountains. The fleet could arrive while the Athenian army struggled overland. If the fleet reached the city first, the victory at Marathon would be negated. The soldiers had to turn their backs on the battlefield and race home. The march back to Athens was a test of physical endurance. These men were covered in dust and blood, moving without transport over difficult ground. They were carrying 70 pounds of bronze equipment and weapons. If they failed to reach the city in time, their families would be captured and their homes destroyed. The fact that they were alive to make this march at all was the result of a specific tactical plan. Hours earlier, a general named Miltiades realized that the Athenians needed to take the initiative before the Persian archers could dismantle their ranks. Looking at this tactical layout, we can see Miltiades' strategy. He deliberately thinned his center to reinforce the outer wings. When the Persian center pushed into the weak middle, the wings pivoted inward, trapping them in a pincer movement and causing a collapse. To reach the Persian line quickly, the Greeks ran. Sprinting directly toward the enemy minimized the time the hoplites spent exposed to Persian archer fire. The Greeks fought in a dense formation called a phalanx. A shield protected the soldier and the man beside him, creating a wall of bronze and spears. This system relied on collective discipline rather than individual displays of courage. This discipline allowed the Athenians to win the battle and immediately begin the march home. They remained organized in their exhaustion, knowing the city's safety depended on their speed. Meanwhile, the Persian fleet moved effortlessly down the coast. The commanders rounded the final stretch, expecting to find a city ready to surrender. As the ships approached the harbor, the commanders finally looked up at the city walls. The walls were already defended. The army that defeated the Persians at Marathon had already arrived and taken their positions. The Athenians won the race. With the element of surprise lost, the Persian commanders faced a difficult reality. Attacking a defended city with an army that had just demonstrated its effectiveness on land was too high a risk. The ships turned and the Persian expedition withdrew from Greece. The victory at Marathon was secured by the march, By beating the fleet to the walls, the Athenians ensured their military success on the plain became a strategic success for the city. Over the centuries, the story of the entire army's march was replaced by the historical runner Phidippides actually traveled from Athens to Sparta to ask for assistance. The standardized 26.2-mile marathon is a 19th-century invention created for the modern Olympic Games. The physical legacy of the battle is still visible on the plain today. The Athenians erected a burial mound over the men who died in the fighting, creating a sacred site that became a central part of the city's identity. The myth of the runner survived because the image is powerful, but the historical impact of the battle was the way it shifted the balance of power across the ancient world. News of the defeat traveled back across the Aegean. King Darius had sent an expedition to punish Athens, and its failure was a humiliation for the empire. This defeat shattered the idea that the Persian military could not be resisted. Darius began a multi-year mobilization of his empire's resources to prepare for a much larger invasion of the Greek mainland. In Athens, the victory led to a surge in political confidence. Over the next 20 years, the city transformed its military strategy. Following the advice of leaders like Themistocles, Athenians used their resources to invest in a fleet, becoming a dominant naval power in the region. This maritime strategy would prove to be the decisive factor when Persia returned under King Xerxes. In 480 BC, the focus of the war moved to the shoreline, and the Athenian navy would lead the resistance at the Battle of Salamis. Marathon was a result of specific decisions made by a city that refused to submit. By winning the battle and the race that followed, the Athenians sent a warning to the Persian Empire that would influence the history of the next generation.